The sky had already darkened into a heavy indigo when Luke Halston urged his horse forward, the animal's hoofs pounding against the frozen dirt road. The wind tore through his coat, slipping past the collar and biting into his skin, but Luke barely felt it. Every nerve in his body was focused on the tiny bundle pressed tightly against his chest. Inside his coat, the baby whimpered, soft, weak sounds that carried more fear than volume. Luke bent forward instinctively, shielding the infant from the cold. "Hold on," he murmured, his voice hoarse and shaking. "Just hold on a little longer." He had never spoken to a baby before tonight. He had never held one either. Evan had been placed into his arms only hours earlier, wrapped in a thin blanket that still smelled faintly of his sister. The memory of her pale face, her final breath, and her whispered plea, "Don't let him starve," clung to Luke like a shadow he couldn't outrun. By the time the lights of the small general store appeared in the distance, Luke's arms ached and his throat burned from the cold. The baby's cries had grown weaker, and that terrified him more than the earlier wailing. Silence, he had learned too quickly, could be far worse. He slid from the saddle, tied the reins with shaking fingers, and pushed open the store door so hard it banged against the wall. Warm air rushed over him, thick with the smell of flour, soap, and kerosene. A bell clanged sharply above his head. A woman behind the counter looked up in alarm. She couldn't have been more than late 20s, her dark hair pinned loosely at the nape of her neck, stray strands escaping as if she'd been too busy to care. Her sleeves were rolled up, and there was a dusting of white flour across her apron, like she'd been interrupted mid-task. "Sir," she said, stepping forward. "We're closed." Luke cut her off, his voice breaking. "Please, I wouldn't come if it wasn't urgent." He pulled the coat open just enough to show the tiny face inside. "I need milk, any kind. My nephew, he hasn't eaten since morning." The woman's expression shifted instantly. The firmness in her posture melted into concern as she hurried around the counter. She peered down at the baby, her breath catching softly. Evan's lips trembled, his skin pale beneath the lantern light. "Oh my God," she whispered. She straightened and glanced toward the back shelves, already shaking her head. "I'm so sorry. There's no milk left. The supply wagon didn't come today. I sold the last bottle this afternoon." Luke felt the words hit him like a physical blow. His knees weakened, and he had to grab the counter to stay upright. "There has to be something," he said desperately. "Powdered milk, cream, anything." She searched anyway, opening cupboards, lifting lids, even checking a crate by the wall. Each movement raised Luke's hope, only to crush it again when she came up empty-handed. "I wish there was," she said quietly. "But there's nothing safe for a baby this small." The baby let out a thin cry, barely audible. Luke's chest tightened painfully. He pressed his forehead against the counter, shame and helplessness washing over him. He was a grown man, a rancher who could handle storms, broken fences, and injured cattle, but he was useless against hunger in a child this fragile. "I don't know what to do," he whispered. "I promised my sister I'd protect him." The woman hesitated, her hands twisting together. Her eyes stayed fixed on the baby, and something deep and unspoken flickered across her face, grief, longing, and an ache that seemed too heavy for the small room. "May I?" she asked softly, reaching out. Luke looked up, startled. "What?" She gestured gently. "May I hold him?" After a moment's pause, Luke nodded and carefully transferred Evan into her arms. The woman cradled him instinctively, supporting his tiny head, rocking him slightly as if her body already remembered the motion. Her breath shuddered as she looked down at him. "My name is Clara," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I lost my baby boy 2 months ago." Luke froze, unsure what to say. "I can still feed him," she continued, her eyes glistening but steady. "If you'll allow me. It's the only way." The room went utterly still. Luke's heart pounded in his ears. He had come begging for milk, never imagining this, never daring to hope for something so intimate, so human. "If it will save him," Luke said hoarsely, "you can have anything I own." Clara shook her head gently. "No," she said, pulling the baby closer. "This isn't about payment." She turned away slightly, settling into a chair near the stove, creating a shield of privacy. Luke stood frozen, hands clenched, afraid to breathe. Moments passed, long, unbearable moments, until Evan's cries softened, then faded entirely. Clara looked up at Luke, tears sliding silently down her cheeks, but there was relief in her eyes. "He's eating," she whispered. "He's going to be all right." Luke sank into the nearest chair, emotion crashing through him like a storm. In that moment, he realized he hadn't just found help for the night. He had found hope, wrapped in the arms of a woman who was already giving his nephew the love he had never known. Morning arrived softly at the ranch, pale sunlight slipping through frost-laced windows and settling over the quiet rooms. Luke woke before dawn, as he always did, but for the first time in years the silence felt different, fragile, expectant. From the spare bedroom came a gentle sound, a hum so low it blended with the creak of the old house. He paused outside the door, hand resting on the frame, listening. Clara sat in the rocking chair by the window, Evan cradled against her. The baby's eyes were half-lidded, his tiny fingers curled into the fabric of her dress as though afraid she might vanish. Clara's voice wove a lullaby without words, just feeling, just comfort. The sight tightened something deep in Luke's chest. He cleared his throat quietly. Clara looked up, startled, then smiled, a small, tired smile that somehow warmed the whole room. He slept through most of the night, she said. Only fussed once. Luke nodded, unsure how to speak without breaking the moment. Thank you, he managed. The word felt too small. The day unfolded in careful steps, as though all three of them were learning how to exist together. Luke made breakfast while Clara stayed with Evan, and more than once he caught himself listening for her footsteps, her voice, the soft rhythm of the rocking chair. When he finally left to tend the cattle, he did so reluctantly, glancing back at the house as if afraid it might disappear when he wasn't looking. Clara explored the ranch in quiet moments, Evan bundled close to her chest. The house was plain but sturdy, every scar in the wood telling a story of work and survival. She sensed Luke's presence in everything, the worn table, the carefully mended chairs, the way tools were cleaned and put away with respect. This was a man who endured, who fixed what broke because there was no one else to do it. As days passed, a rhythm formed. Clara fed Evan and watched him grow stronger, his cries gaining volume, his skin warming with life. Luke learned how to hold him without fear, how to rock him clumsily while Clara smiled and corrected him gently. Their conversations were simple at first, about chores, weather, the baby's needs, but beneath the words lay an unspoken gratitude, a shared secret of how close everything had come to ending. At night, when Evan stirred, it was Clara's voice that calmed him. Luke noticed how the baby turned toward her instinctively, how his body relaxed the moment she touched him. The realization stung in a way Luke didn't expect. He was grateful, more grateful than he could ever express, but he also felt the sharp edge of his own limitations. He had love to give, but he didn't know how to be what Evan needed. One evening, a storm rolled in suddenly, wind howling across the plains and rattling the windows. Evan began to cry, sharp and frightened. Luke tried to soothe him, pacing the room, whispering reassurances that sounded hollow even to his own ears. The crying only worsened. Clara appeared in the doorway, her hair loose from its pins. "May I?" she asked softly. Luke handed Evan over without hesitation. The change was immediate. Clara pressed the baby against her, murmuring gently, and the cries dissolved into hiccups, then silence. Luke watched, a mix of awe and humility washing over him. "You saved him," Luke said quietly when Evan finally slept. "That night in the store, you didn't just feed him. You gave him something I couldn't." Clara looked down at the child in her arms. "He needed someone," she replied. "So did I." The words lingered between them. Clara rarely spoke of her loss, but Luke sensed the shape of it in her pauses, in the way her eyes sometimes drifted to nothing. She carried grief with grace, but it was still grief, heavy, constant. Later that night, Clara sat alone on the edge of the bed, watching Evan breathe. Doubt crept in quietly. She had come to help, not to stay. This was Luke's life, Luke's child. Her presence felt right, but rightness was dangerous when it came wrapped in borrowed time. Luke knocked softly on the doorframe. "I don't know how long you plan to stay," he said, choosing his words carefully, "but you're welcome here. As long as you need." Clara met his gaze, emotion rising unexpectedly. "I don't want to overstep," she said. "I don't want him to get used to me if I can't be what he needs." Luke stepped closer, his voice steady but raw. "He already is used to you. And so am I." The admission hung heavy in the room. Clara looked away, afraid of the hope blooming in her chest. Outside, the storm began to fade, leaving the house wrapped in quiet. Inside, two wounded hearts hovered on the edge of something new, something neither of them had planned, but both of them were slowly, helplessly beginning to need. Winter settled over the ranch like a long-held breath, steady and unyielding. Snow blanketed the fields, softened the fences, and muted the world beyond the house. Inside, life unfolded in small, meaningful moments. Evan grew stronger each day, his cheeks filling out, his cries turning into curious sounds that made Clara laugh despite herself. Luke watched it all with quiet wonder, as though each milestone stitched something broken inside him back together. Clara tried to tell herself this was temporary. Every morning she reminded herself she had a life elsewhere, a room in town, a job she could return to. Yet each night, as she rocked Evan to sleep, the idea of leaving felt heavier. This house no longer echoed with loneliness, it breathed. And she was part of that breath. Luke sensed the tension growing in her. He noticed how she lingered by the window after sunset, how her smiles sometimes carried an edge of sorrow. He knew what it meant, to care deeply and fear the cost. He had lived that way since his sister died, since responsibility had replaced choice. One evening, as the fire crackled low, Clara finally spoke the fear aloud. "When Evan no longer needs me," she said quietly, eyes fixed on the flames, "I should go." Luke looked up sharply. "Go where?" "Back to my life," she replied, though her voice wavered. This was never meant to be permanent. He stood, crossing the room slowly, as if afraid. Sudden movement might shatter something fragile. "You think what you've done here is temporary?" She swallowed. "I don't want to stay where I'm only filling a gap." Luke stopped in front of her. "You didn't fill a gap, Clara. You changed the shape of this home." His voice softened. "You changed me." Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. "I lost my baby," she whispered. "Loving Evan feels like betraying him." Luke knelt in front of her, steady and sincere. "Loving again doesn't erase what you lost. It honors it." Clara's breath hitched. Evan stirred in her arms, small fingers curling into her sleeve as if he sensed the weight of the moment. Luke reached out and brushed a fingertip across the baby's cheek. "He looks for you," Luke said quietly. "When he's scared, when he wakes up, he looks for you." He met her gaze. "That's not an accident." Clara pressed her lips together, emotion flooding through her. She had been running from hope because hope had once broken her. But here it was again, gentler, steadier, asking nothing but honesty. Days later, the truth arrived in the simplest way. Clara fell ill with a winter fever, her strength fading fast. Luke took over without hesitation, feeding Evan as best he could, rocking him through restless nights, and sitting beside Clara's bed, wiping her brow with cool cloths. "You don't have to stay," she murmured weakly one night. "I don't want to be a burden." Luke shook his head firmly. "You never were." As she recovered, Clara saw something new in Luke, a tenderness he had never shown himself credit for. He was learning, growing, stepping into fatherhood not out of duty alone, but out of love. And she realized then that she wasn't replacing anyone. She was building something alongside him. When spring finally hinted at returning, snow melting into soft earth, Luke took Clara and Evan out to the edge of the pasture. The sky was wide and clear, endless blue stretching above them. "I was wrong the night I begged for milk," Luke said, a faint smile touching his lips. "I thought I needed food to keep him alive." Clara looked at him, heart pounding. "What he needed," Luke continued, "was you. What I needed, was a family." He reached for her hand, tentative but sure. "Stay," he said simply. Clara looked down at Evan, then back at Luke. The fear that once ruled her loosened its grip. She had been given another chance, not to replace what she lost, but to let love grow again in a new way. She nodded, tears shining. "I'm not going anywhere." Luke exhaled, relief and joy breaking through at last. He wrapped an arm around both of them, holding on as if to something sacred. In the quiet of the open land, Clara understood the truth at last. She had fed a hungry baby on a desperate night, but in doing so, she had also fed a lonely man's heart, and healed her own.